Okay, good. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Mike O'Neill, and it's my pleasure to serve as the host of this webinar. This webinar came together as a direct result of clients asking lots of questions, and there was a kind of recurring theme in those questions. What in the world are we going to do with this impending COVID issue? This series has turned into a weekly series, and we this week are welcoming as one of our panelists Sandy Anderson. Sandy, welcome.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks.
Well, we're glad you're with us. And we again have my colleague Rhonda Beard. Rhonda, welcome.
Good morning. Thanks.
To give you a little sense of kind of what is it we're going to be doing today, the format in large part is determined by you, and that is this is designed to be a question and answer session, and therefore we need to know your questions. Everybody who registered for this will have an opportunity to, if they want to go back and play it, because everybody who registered will be getting an email from us, and there will be a link in that email that will have not only the recording of this webinar, but also it will have a kind of a summary of the questions that you were asked, and we'll put our answers in writing. It also will have contact information for Sandy and some other things. So be looking for that follow-up email, and we try to get that out on Friday. So be looking for that on Friday. In like fashion, you will also be receiving an invitation to our next webinar, which will be same time next Thursday. But it does hinge in large part on your questions. We need to know what's on your mind so we can address that, because that's what drives this. That's what makes this a unique approach to doing webinars. We've already had one who has used the chat pane, and I don't know if you've accessed that, Rhonda, or not, but let's make sure we do get Catherine's question actually answer while we're actually together. But the format we're going to follow is going to be in two parts. Part one, we're going to be hearing from Sandy, and her topic is going to be dealing with how do you position your teams, and you are leaders on this call, to function most effectively post-COVID. And then after Sandy, we're going to move to Rhonda, who is going to have some updates that I think you'll find very, very helpful. But along those lines, let me give you a little bit of an introduction of Sandy. Sandy's a new friend of mine, but I feel like I've known her all my life. She has that quality, and I think you'll see that in just a moment. Her firm, Sandy Anderson Consulting and Coaching, is based in Austin, Minnesota. And I learned of Sandy and had a chance to listen on one of her webinars, and just found that her personal approach is something that I think we all need right now. As harried as things has gotten, she has a perspective that I found meaningful, and I hope you will as well. So Sandy, I'm going to turn this over to you, but I actually have a question for you, if you don't mind. And that is, when you go to your website, and as you and I have talked, you make reference to the word relevancy. You use it quite a bit. How do you define relevancy? What does that mean?
Well, you know, my work really is based on helping organizations, but when I'm talking about organizations, it's not only the businesses, because I look at families as organizations. Really, families are the first organization that we're born into, and it's our first experience where we start to see, you know, do we have a voice? Are our opinions important? Can we share ideas? How safe it is? That type of thing. So all of my work in general, I want it to be relevant or evergreen to not just where we work, but also where we live. And relevancy and resiliency are two core components of the work that I do, because I think that it's extremely important to, those two things are really important to work culture. How resilient we are in terms of our ability to face difficult things, but also how relevant we are, not only in our programs, but also and services to clients, but also how relevant are our HR policies, things like that, because we're competing. And I think as we transition after this initial middle that I'll be speaking to of this challenge, we are going to be competing if for the workforce again, right? I mean, we were doing that before. And so I think those companies that really understand that they need to be relevant is going to be even more important, because people are not only going to say, does my work matter? Would my work matter with you? But also, what did you do during this particular middle of COVID? How did you treat your employees? And that becomes a piece of relevancy too. So that honing in on relevancy, I really think is why it's so important for me. Is I feel like it has a direct impact on recruitment, retention of quality team members, and then team engagement.
Sandy, when I saw the word relevancy, I might have looked at it a little bit wrong. What kind of crossed my mind is it seems as if sometimes in life we just go through life day to day and we're not quite sure why we do what we do. And on a personal level, I think COVID has served as a wake-up call to many people, and that is what really matters most. But what really intrigued me about you and why I wanted you to be part of us this morning is, could that same process apply to organizations? Are companies just going through the motions day in and day out, and could they have lost sight of what really matters most? And with COVID, all the things that they knew as normal aren't. So I'm assuming you're going to be speaking to that piece on how organizations can recenter themselves to be focused on the kinds of things that really are most relevant. Is that a fair description?
Yes, absolutely. And again, part of my work, with thinking about relevance right now is I've created this framework for myself, and then have shared it with clients, and they've said, wow, this really helps us to put some anchors on a challenge. And so I have this framework where I think about before, middle, and other side when I'm approaching a challenge, whether it's a personal challenge or whether an organization is facing a challenge, and this can be within a team in an organization, or it can be the organization as a whole is facing this challenge right now that we're in the middle with. So there's how we did life and work before COVID-19. We can look back on that and we can see how we did work. How did we serve our clients? What were our programs? What were our services? Those types of things before. And now we're in the middle. And so we have to ask some different questions when we're in the middle here. Because the decisions that we make and what we do in the middle are going to have a direct impact on the other side. And we know the other side isn't going to be a light switch on and off. It's going to be a transition. And we don't know exactly what that transition is going to look like. And it's going to be different for everybody. But I think when we start to really understand how important it is this middle time, to be able to be asking some questions that really get to relevancy. And I'm going to end up sharing a document with you that just has some things to start to plant some seeds for some questions. But I think one of, an important question to be asking for organizations to be asking themselves are, what processes or policies or programs or even team positions in the before are we discovering are no longer relevant in the middle, okay? Maybe respectfully need to be released. And that's a tough one, because sometimes those programs that we've had before, they've been pet projects of ours, or there's something that we've invested really big into. And then all of a sudden we go, wow, this has turned us on our head. This is no longer relevant. And it's likely not going to be as relevant, in the future. Now we can say, well, we've always done it that way. And we know what that leads to. I mean, you've heard that, that has become even more important now. So really being able to ask some curious questions about what were we doing before that is actually showing up in this middle challenge as still being of value. But then also asking when we're in this middle is, what are unexpected discoveries that we're having and kind of surfacing, those things that might serve us well on the other side. For instance, we were talking before a lot of people got on how, we're having to learn new platforms to be able to connect with people. I would never have created a YouTube channel. And I will tell you, it's not perfect, but it is in process. And I'm having to offer myself a lot of grace in this because I'm learning. But I look at that as pioneering versus, it having to be perfect. And so we're discovering, everybody's discovering things personally, maybe about themselves, their families, their relationships, as well as their work. And really being able to name those things, those discoveries. But this is, I think, the interesting thing for organizations is being curious about what you're discovering from your client's perspective, what you're discovering from your team members' perspective. So it's not just coming from top leadership and saying, oh, these are the things we're discovering, but really having those key conversations, those crucial conversations with the very people you want to engage in the work, and then also that you're serving.
Sandy, are you finding in working with clients in this middle time right now, are they highly distracted? Is what we're talking about something they're going to have to be very intentional to do because of these distractions?
So I will tell you something I'm observing, and this is just my observation, is that organizations, and so I work with a variety of organizations, healthcare, manufacturing, nonprofits, education, and there's several different organizations that I've done some work with in the past and we've in the before, and we've talked about culture. We've started to do work about how do you, elevate a relevant culture, a resilient culture. What are strategies to do that? And recognizing that it is not about a program that you buy, it's about shifting how we show up and really getting to some of those more deeper relationship things. But those folks that had already dipped their toe in that and doing that work, they are coming up with some amazing things in the middle here. Even in that they are doing less of the chasing shiny things, and they're more focused because they know what it is that they're working towards. They've defined, here's the culture that we want in our organization, and here is how we can grow, protect, and represent it. So there's some key things that they're able to go back to. Those organizations that, some that have reached out to me that previously had been, that's all soft stuff. That's all soft stuff. They're having a different experience in the middle because now they're trying to build relationship and trust in the midst of all of the chaos. And that is really hard to do. It's not impossible though. So I think, yeah, I'm definitely seeing the impact of those who have invested in previously the culture, the desired culture versus just the culture by default, that have just really given them a little bit more focus in the middle.
I think you know that Rhonda and I come from an HR background, and so I know our ears are kind of listening to how can we listen to you and apply that from an employee perspective. We have not only HR folks on this webinar, we also have people in key leadership roles and business owners. Do you find that what you're describing equally applies?
Absolutely. I mean, yesterday is a perfect example. I got a phone call from the head of an HR department in an organization that I had some experience with. And they said, hey, we've got a supervisor who just didn't show up for work today, and it's really not like them. And we've reached out. We're making connections, and we really would like you to be able to connect with that person. That decision and that action on part of HR is going to impact how that employee shows up for them on the other side. It's impacting how they show up now, but that link to getting them a link to resources that are going to be helpful and practical during this time. I spent time yesterday doing consulting and some coaching with folks that are in education and some of the stressors that the teachers are feeling right now. And honestly, from HR, what would be a great message for them to hear is that you're doing awesome. You're learning, and quite honestly, it is not about raising the academics right now. It's about maintaining, and I love the perspective of a person that I had spoke to that said, kids now are not going to remember, and I think this goes for workers and organizations as well, because school is like kids' work, right? Kids now are not going to remember the academics that they learned during this time. They're going to remember how they felt.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I think that goes the same for our organizations.
And we have spent a lot of time talking about that on our webinars, as well as with some people we've consulted with, is employees are going to remember how they were treated by their company during this time. And
absolutely,
we've obviously spent a lot of time on communication. One thing you mentioned, Sandy, I think is really important when you mentioned earlier that things don't have to be perfect. I've seen, and I'd be interested to see if you've seen too, if people are becoming more informal now. You know, in the past, it's you plan for a session like this or a meeting or something, and everything has to be perfect, and you don't want glitches. You test everything. Well, we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants every day with what's going on, and I've seen that communications and training and programs have really become a lot more informal, which to me is good. I think people are more comfortable with that. But are you seeing that with people too?
I am. And one of the things that I will say often is how we live impacts how we lead. So if you think about that, how we live, our own personal habits, how our relationships, all of those things impact how we lead in the workplace. Okay. We now have seen how we live and how we lead collide in a way that we could have never imagined, because we're leading from our lives. We're leading from the very places that we live. Yeah. And I think that really brings home the fact that, people would talk about work-life balance and separating work and life. And it's not, that's more, to me, more of the technical and task part. What I'm seeing is, we can't separate our personal, pieces from that. So I think there's a lot more grace because people are trying and testing out things. And that's why I will say to clients, especially some entrepreneurs I'm working with, this is the time to explore, because people are offering a whole lot more grace when you make mistakes on technical things than they would have in the past. So this is the time to pioneer and explore. And, I always come back to these 3 points that I will say to folks, whether they're C-suite or whether it is working with, I love like some of the groups I get to work with, paraprofessionals or bus drivers or others, to be able to say there's 3 things that really we can hang back into is just do the next right thing. When it comes to, our work, that next right thing. And that might mean getting up from our desk and going to have a conversation, although no, that's not quite applicable, but it might be sending that text to that team member and checking in to see how they're doing. The second is be faithful in the little things. It is those little things. So it might be, we've been so used to looking at the big things and moving big things. And I think right now this has really shrunk down to say it's those little things that really matter. That part gets into like how people feel, how we're showing up for people. And then finally, be relentlessly kind to everyone, because we can even offer feedback, even difficult feedback, and be relentlessly kind in it. And this is just a time where kindness is, again, we might think of it as a soft skill, but it is the one that is going to change how people view the other side. Really quick, I heard a woman share how her daughter said to her that when she gets to be able to go get a job, she is going to ask them, how did they treat their employees during COVID? I thought that was interesting insight, because I think that's a really great question, because it's going to be an opportunity for a business, an organization to say, great question. Here's how we pivoted our work, but here's how we treated our people. Yeah. And so I think that's very insightful.
We've already got, apologize. We've got a question that came up here that I may want to pose to both of you. And the kind of question is, with this in mind, and we're talking about the soft side of this, and we're talking about how we treat our customers, how we treat our employees, how we treat each other now will have significant influence down the road. It could even influence people's decisions they come work for your organization or not. In real practical terms, what are you hearing from clients? And I want to ask the same question of you, Rhonda, in terms of the clients that you're dealing with, and is what are they coming to you with? What are the kind of problems you're hearing right now that we need to be mindful of, that we might need to talk a little bit more about here?
Well, one of the things that I am seeing is that the problems that were there before are just bigger now in the middle.
Mm.
They've just gotten larger. So a simple example, yesterday, there was a company who had one person trained in a couple of different areas. And that's one of the questions I ask in the relevant questions, is being able to ask, what vulnerabilities or gaps are you seeing, are coming up during this time? And then asking yourself, was that there before? And we just kind of were like, yeah, we didn't have time for that. And in this case, that was the point. This company said, no, we're not going to train other people in those areas. We don't want to invest the money in it. Okay. Now they're in a position where they have one person trained in a couple of different areas. And that might seem ridiculous to some, but I think that's pretty common in some small businesses, right? And so being able to, I think when we're looking, the problems I'm hearing about are ones that oftentimes were already there before. And that's why being able to ask that question, what were we doing before that wasn't serving us well then, and is certainly not serving us well now? And then making that decision to be able to decide, how are we going to change that as we move forward? And one of the things that, Mike, you and I talked a little bit about that I just want to briefly share is that I found for my clients, I've developed this concept called a relevancy filter. And just really quick, it's kind of the idea, if you're a coffee drinker, and I love coffee, if you're a coffee drinker, you have this coffee filter that you put in, and then you pour the water in and it goes through and it makes a great pot of coffee. But sometimes that filter bends over. And so we get a little bit of grounds in our coffee. And most of us coffee drinkers are okay with that. We'll still drink it, we'll still tolerate it. But then there's those days when you forget to put the filter in, and you are, not only drinking your coffee, you're chewing it. And it's kind of like organizations, where when we sometimes can be in organizations where we have cultures where we're used to chewing coffee. And when we chew coffee, we get this bitter taste and we share it with our clients, okay? So part of what we need to do is make sure, how do we get that the good service, the consistent, way to serve our clients. And so this relevancy filter really starts to help clients to go, what is our mission? What's our vision? And with each client, it's different. Your relevancy filter is going to be different, but it starts to get to some core things where you get to have 2 or 3 different points that you go through every time you're making a decision. And it really helps you not to chase those shiny things again. And that's one of the problems that I'm seeing with clients, is they're kind of going like this. Should I do this? Should I do this? Should I pivot to this? And those that have a relevancy filter can go back to, and I know even for myself in my business, I've gone back to that on a daily basis, saying, nope, I'm not going to do that because that does not make it through my filter. Yes, I'm going to do that, but I don't have the capacity to do it right now. So I think one of the problems I'm seeing is this, like, where do we shift? How do we shift? And a lot of precious resources of energy and time and finances being put in places that may not serve them well on the other side.
Sandy, you've made an interesting point, and that is you've tried to put things in proper perspective, and we're in that middle. And you tried to stress that this is the time that people will pay attention to how they are treated, customers, employees, and the like. But we also have right now very hard economic times. Rhonda, I'm going to kind of throw this question to you. We have clients that have had very little impact of COVID on their business. Matter of fact, business is actually up for them. But we have clients who things are really slow. They may be at half capacity. And this actually came up from one of the questions that was asked by one of the attendees. And that is, when you're working at half capacity, how can we take what Sandy is describing here, and if they're chewing their coffee, how might you suggest in practical terms that we should be doing right now to address that? There's so many issues this brings up.
There are, and you're right. There's so many different companies in different stages of reopening. And if you're at half capacity, and I see the question too about, selecting who you might want to bring back, who you don't need to bring back. And what I'm seeing, to kind of add to what Sandy was mentioning about what companies are dealing with right now, a lot of what companies are dealing with is the dilemma between flexibility and accountability. So, we have rules and we have policies and we have expectations, and yet we're trying to be flexible with people because their situations are so different than they've ever dealt with before. And situations between employees are so different that you try to handle as best you can things as they come up day by day, but it's hard to plan anything. And I think that's the most difficulty people are having right now, is trying to hold people accountable, being consistent, and yet being flexible when you don't know what's happening day to day with people. And, employees, obviously with kids at home, are in a different scenario than employees that don't have kids at home, people that are working versus people that are teleworking. So there's so many different scenarios right now that companies are having to deal with, and there's not a playbook for it. We don't have a playbook for this. There's no, handbook to follow that says do this in this situation. So a lot of it is figuring it out as you go along. And I think that, the question about operating at half capacity, there definitely are things that you can apply with the people that are with you. And if you have people who are out of work that you are certain that you want to bring back, that are going to come back at some point, then you need to keep those relationships intact. You need to keep that communication intact with them, because again, if they're not working, they're still going to remember how they were treated, whether they're at work or not. And then, the question of, what if we don't call people back, or we just want to let people go and hire somebody different? That's a legal issue that you need to be very careful with. And certainly we'd want to talk more about that particular situation. But before you just start letting people go, be very careful with the reasons you're letting them go. Because again, we still have civil rights, ADA considerations, lots of considerations in those types of decisions before you let somebody go or don't bring them back. So be careful with that. But I think some of the things that Sandy's talking about, you can absolutely do no matter how many people are working, no matter how many are at work or teleworking. You just have to, again, pivot how you're doing that based on the situation. And it's tough. It's very tough with so many different scenarios in different companies right now.
One of the related questions to that, Sandy, I'm going to kind of pose it to you first, and that is, one of the recurring themes in our Q&A sessions over the weeks has been communication. Mm-hmm. Communication under the best of circumstances oftentimes is one of the biggest complaints that we hear. In this type of situation, it's surfaced even more. But then we've got employees who have direct interaction with the customers. And you've talked about the importance of keeping everything relevant, keeping things kind of focused. I'm going to read the question, Sandy, and the question kind of reads, I know that communications with customers has to change too, but how do we guide our employees on appropriate ways to manage those conversations with customers, for one, fellow employees, and to some extent, those conversations when they get home at night?
So part of what, and I think that the thing that feels complicated with that is you can't train somebody on every potential conversation they're going to have, right? So it is really looking back to some of the basics, and I think that's where mission and values come to be really important. The unfortunate thing that I found in most organizations is the average employee has no idea what the company's mission is. They don't really know their why. And oftentimes the company themselves, even the top leaders, may be able to say the mission, but if I ask them, why do you guys exist? What do you want to impact? What do you want to contribute? And those become really important questions. And I understand, there's those screaming needs that we have right now, but there's this core this core opportunity to say, why do we exist as an organization? What do we want to impact and what do we want to contribute? Because when the company can, when leadership can own that, and it is stated in 1 or 2 sentences so that every employee sees it on a regular basis, that starts to be the North Star. That starts to be every communication, whether it's to my peers, colleagues, whether it is to my customer, needs to grow, protect, and represent that why or that mission, okay? And I think that being able to have that stated, so for instance, just on a practical basis, part of my relevancy filter, my first part is my why, or what might call the mission. And that is to create spaces where people can explore potential, emerge vision, engage strategy in ways that build relevancy, resiliency. Okay, so when I am going to be doing work, and at the end of the day even, I can look back and say, did I work my why? Every interaction that I have with people, with customers, or with a colleague I'm working with, I want to make sure that I'm creating a space where we can explore potential, where we can maybe emerge a vision, you know. So and again, that might feel like soft pieces, but being able to really understand for our workers, for our team members to understand the why of the company becomes essential. And this is where I see some folks struggling in the middle, because they have a paragraph long mission and the average employee or team member does not really know the why.
You know, you raise a good point. One thing that we have found, the questions that we address on this webinar don't only come up during the webinars. We get emails throughout the week say, these are some things we'd like y'all to talk about. And it's kind of what you just said that kind of, I'd like to turn this a little bit to Rhonda just for a moment. And that is, you know, Rhonda, you're saying we're looking at a future we're not quite sure what it looks like, but we've begun referring to it as the new normal. As we bridge the kind of things that Sandy has been sharing with the kind of questions we've been kind of getting, from your perspective, what are you hearing? What are you seeing as what the new normal is, and how does it affect us as leaders?
Well, again, kind of continuing from what I was saying, not all companies are in the same situation. Different industries, some industries have been working full, have been overloaded. Others are closed down completely, and many others in the middle. And as businesses start to reopen and bring people back or change the work scenario, it's not going to be the same as when they left. So people who may have been out of work or teleworking, as they come back into the workplace, it's going to be a different workplace for many, or even people who've been continuing to work, it's a different workplace. So, I want to talk about just a few things that leaders and HR staff can be looking at as they plan for reopening or plan for what the new normal might be, which we're not completely certain what that is yet. Again, there's no playbook and it's day by day, but everybody's doing the best we can to work through that as we learn more. And what I'm hearing is this is not going to go away in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. There's potentially another wave of COVID coming in the fall. So businesses really need to be looking at the new normal as not just a short term, but typically it could be up to 12 to 18 months of some restrictions and changes in the way we're running our businesses. So you need to really be thinking about what kind of changes and things to have in place to sustain this for longer than just a couple months. And a few things, and there's a question about this too, which I think this will answer. For instance, being a little bit more open to flexibility for telework and different schedules and things like that. A lot of companies have had, very strict attendance policies, very strict no work from home. You have to be here between these hours. And trying to be more open-minded, if your business allows that, to some different work scenarios, hours, shifts. It's one of the biggest challenges companies are having right now, is dealing with over 60% of salaried people are teleworking. And that has increased exponentially just over the last few months. And again, trying to figure out how to manage those people, how to get some guidelines in place. So if you don't have telework policies or flexible work policies, you should be thinking about putting them in place and having some clear guidelines on what's acceptable and what isn't. And I saw a question earlier too about that, and whether you should have restrictions when you're, for instance, on meetings like this about dogs in the background and kids in the background. And I think you should. I think you should definitely outline expectations for people, but again, not lose that flexibility and understanding and compassion when people are in situations where they have, like Sandy said, we're living where we're working now. We're working where we're living. So we have to be cognizant of that and not be so stringent on rules we put on people, but at least be able to outline expectations of, you know, it's going to be best if you can close yourself off in a room and not have distractions. If you do, we understand. So put those expectations in place, but still be flexible with people and understanding when they have different scenarios that they're having to deal with. But again, telework is one of the biggest challenges. Well, there's a lot of benefits that people have realized from it, employees as well as companies, and that companies can realize from it going forward. You typically have reduced absenteeism. You know, if you're sick, you might still be able to work from home. So it could definitely impact the here and now time for people being able to do more than if they had to actually come into work. It may improve your work-life balance, and some challenges that people have with that though. And again, some things I think you can put in place is helping people with some structure to their telework times, putting some things in place that helps them with start and end times and how to telework effectively and how to set up an office. So having all those things in place will help people be more effective with telework. And it's a great benefit for employees as well. Don't have to commute to work. They don't have the drive time. They don't have, you know, the gas cost. So, you know, you're typically saving a lot of time for individuals when they don't have to commute. So, you know, think of the benefits of that and how your companies may be able to continue it. And then also just try to be flexible with hours. Think about different schedules people may be able to work and still get their work done, whether it's at work or at home or in a remote location, varying hours to help people with their childcare situations. So again, I know that the challenge is holding people accountable, trying to stick to some norms and consistencies and be flexible. But right now, I think flexibility is one of the most important things to keep in mind as you're trying to get some things in place. Making sure, again, this is going to be a long-term dilemma for people. So making sure you have business contingency plans, making sure your contingency plans include pandemic, which most don't, and how you're going to handle these things going forward with staffing, with flexibility, with people who may be restricted, what you have to do in your workplaces. So having business contingency plans that deal with what type of cleaning schedules you have, what you do with your supply base. If you can't get supplies that you need to run your business, what are your backup plans? And then I think most importantly, Sandy touched on this a little bit, but training your managers. You can't train them in every possible scenario that comes up, but you can certainly train them in being more flexible and how to communicate with people, be more empathetic and understanding, and how to deal with these situations differently maybe than they've dealt with employee situations in the past, and communicating with customers, customer service in the new normal. How are people going to handle the communication with customers when maybe they're not coming into your office anymore? And just how to lead differently in this type of environment where maybe you have a combination of employees that are at work and some who are not at work, or whose jobs have changed or hours have changed. So make sure that you're training your leaders to handle these new situations differently and think differently under whatever the new normal might be. And again, you know, as Sandy mentioned, we talked about earlier, employees are going to remember how they were treated during this time. And this is where our strongest leaders emerge too and adapt. You're going to be able to see who adapts and who can handle these situations effectively when they have to pivot quickly. So just make sure you do have things in place to deal with these types of changes on a longer term basis than what we might have originally thought we were dealing with.
That's very helpful. Sandy, I want to go back to you first and maybe go back to Rhonda with almost the same question. In your consulting practice, you work with organizations from a strategic planning standpoint. And you've shared with us by which you've worked with clients who you've already worked with them as they got clarity on their why. Are you finding that these same clients, because of these changes, Rhonda talked about the flexibility that we're encouraging, the move to teleworking, all these changes that have come in so fast, do you envision that companies might need to revisit the why, their mission statement?
Absolutely. I saw that question up there. And, in the past, I would hear people whenever I would start to talk about, like, so why do you guys exist? What do you want to impact? What do you want to contribute? I would hear things like, ooh, that sounds like mission creeping, and we don't do that. Our mission is our mission. And I'm like, oh, it's okay. That's great. But make sure that your mission is something that you want to grow more of and that it's relevant now. It may have been relevant 20 years ago, but is it relevant now? So I would say to the question in terms of might we need to change the mission statement based on the crisis, I would say, I don't know if it's so much based on the crisis, but if you really are, doing some reflection, was that mission statement serving you well before this happened? And you may find that it was cumbersome then. So I do think that, yes, we do need to make sure if there is a time for relevancy, it is now, because we have limited resources, time, energy, and we just don't have, we don't have the luxury or, that ability to just, honestly just be Mickey Mousing around. I want to know that my job matters. I want to know how you want me to do my job. I know what my role is. And that kind of leads into the other question that I just want to give a super quick response to, is for those that maybe are having people that are employees that are working from home and doing very little while they're there, but you also have staff members on site. This is where, when Rhonda was talking about flexibility, this means that flexibility may roll down to, your job role and description is also going to flex. Because in order for us to survive, in order for us to thrive, we need to pivot also job descriptions and roles potentially. So that might end up being a conversation. And it came to mind for me where some paraprofessionals who are struggling with, like, what do I do, in this distant learning piece? Well, one school district, what they're doing is they're having their paraprofessionals create short little video vignettes on different learning things. Well, they've never done that before, but all of a sudden that's part of their job description. And I will tell you that those paraprofessionals now are getting so excited. In fact, one of them said, I think I want to actually go back to school and be a teacher. So this is one of those discoveries. Or I think about like artificial intelligence and when we talk about trucking and how that's going to change and that there might be, automatic driving of trucks. Well, that's not, the truckers aren't going to lose their jobs, but they're going to be doing something differently while their truck is automatically driving. So there's been that flex and pivot. And I think that's something that can be of value, is to look at job descriptions and roles, and also knowing, like, how can we flex with that to make them more relevant in the middle, but then also make some discoveries for the other side.
Rhonda, I know that we do strategic planning work with clients, and typically the horizon we look at is about 12 months into the future, because you want to kind of plan for that. In today's environment, what we're finding is that time horizon has shrunk considerably. What clients are asking help for is, how do we get through the next 30, 60, 90 days? What are the things that need to fall into place because of the radical change? Rhonda, you made reference to the new normal. One of the questions that came up is, with the economy taking the hit that it is, and I hate to be such a kind of a sourpuss, but as of this morning, it was reported 3.2 million additional folks have applied for unemployment last week. That brings the total to like 33 million in the United States. That's a staggering number. And we're trying to also acknowledge that what we have here is an economic emergency. And therefore, the changes that we're dealing with right now may not be temporary. It may be something much more long-term. Rhonda, you made that reference. The question kind of dealt with Mark Cuban. If you've not listened to his webinars, it's just very interesting. His perspective is very healthy to listen to. I learned a lot just by listening to him, but he's begun describing as what lies ahead as America 2.0. And this question reads, well, if we're figuring out how to make teleworking work on a temporary basis, Rhonda, do you see that teleworking is going to become more of a permanent solution going forward?
Well, I think it will, and I think it already has. And there's probably, oh, I don't know how many articles I've read recently, but a lot of companies are looking at people that have been teleworking and again, thinking about it differently and being more flexible and open to those options. It's working. For a lot of people, it's working really well. And there's some predictions that up to maybe half of the people that have started teleworking in the last 90 days probably won't go back to bricks and mortar. And for companies, that can be a big savings too, because some companies are starting to relook at their lease agreements, starting to relook at their floor space. In some cases, you have more floor space needed if you have to social distance, but can you offset that by allowing some people to work from home, continue to telework? So it can save definitely on cost. It can save not just floor space, but furniture and the number of people in a building. So there's a number of ways that it can benefit companies, and they should definitely be looking at that where it is effective. Now, it's not effective for everybody and every job and every company. But again, I think companies just need to be more open-minded to take a look at those situations and where that can work and what employees are more comfortable working at home, because there's still some anxieties that people have about going into workplaces or large groups, or not certain about how the social distancing is going to be handled. So, where there's options and you don't have to force people into something that they're uncomfortable with, again, they're going to be more appreciative, more productive, more satisfied with their work and their job, which is going to pay off for everybody in the long run. So I think telework is definitely going to see an increase on a more permanent basis.
I think I know the answer from what we see on our side of our consulting practice. Sandy, with all of these changing things going on at such a rapid pace, are you of the opinion that when people are working in a teleworking, do they lose something about that sense of connection to the organization? You don't have the same water cooler talks and that kind of thing. This came up in one of our earlier webinars, but from what you're seeing, do we need as leaders to be mindful that one of the maybe unintended consequences of teleworking is people might feel a bit more detached from their organization?
Absolutely. And the danger that there's a couple of just quick thoughts. Those employees who were already disengaged because of work culture or whatever, now they've just disengaged more, right? It's actually just so you have that. And that was a before issue. It's nothing new with that, let's say, particular person. But now in the middle, it's just elevated it, right? But I think this is where getting back to what's the next right thing and being faithful in the little things, because this may be something that as leaders, we're putting on our calendar the names of people that we are reaching out by text to check in with. It might be that we're reaching out by email to check in with. And it's not just how's the work going and is there anything that you need to be able to help continue to do your work, but also how's your family? It's that connecting piece. So how we do the water cooler just looks different, all right? But I think people are adapting, because even clients of mine who would never have done online coaching, leadership coaching or life coaching or even online consulting now are doing that, because that's part of the new normal. That's part of, now I'm comfortable with this. There's this thing called Zoom, or there's these other, platforms. So I think being able to, understand that, yeah, this isn't going to go away, and it's going to actually introduce some sustainable ways to do work that might save us money and morale. And just one other thought that I think is a practical thing for leaders to do in organizations when they are thinking about how to make these transitions and what workspaces will look like. Ask the people it impacts. you know, we can do surveys. We can do it. This is where being able to ask the frontline workers that are affected by the decisions that are being made, you are going to, and if it's done in a way that is, they're able to be transparent and vulnerable with their ideas, you're going to get some amazing solutions and ideas that we would have never thought of. But because they're in the midst of that, they've come up with it, or they've heard from a friend or relative who's working someplace else that they've done something like that. So I think, please, don't miss that opportunity to engage your team members in being part of the solutions that you're facing. Those are no longer just those high-end boardroom discussions. Some of those things have to go to the frontline workers to say, hey, we're trying to figure this out and we need collective impact with this. Your opinion matters.
I cannot believe we are quickly about to run out of time, but I'd like to try to squeeze in a couple more questions before we do run out of time. This is a question, I'm going to probably direct this to you, Rhonda. This is from Christy Gazaway, and that is, they have employees who are in an sales and marketing role. They're outside sales and marketing, but they've not been working. They've been literally sitting at home for the last 6 weeks. And I believe what Christy is saying is that, but they've been getting paid, whereas they have employees who are still coming to the office working. And so you've got folks who are not working, getting paid, those who are working, getting paid. The question is, how do you reintroduce this in such a way that it feels fair?
Well, and I think, yeah, very good question. And absolutely, I think you want to get those people more engaged in your business. If they're not calling on customers, obviously that's affecting your business. I understand many businesses have kind of put some things on halt for the time being. Sandy mentioned something earlier that I thought of when I saw this question too. If nothing else, they should definitely be reaching out to customers, keeping those relationships in place, keeping those communication lines open, and maybe try to get them thinking creatively about how they're going to do their jobs differently. Videotaping, for instance, doing videos of, different demonstrations. We've talked about virtual office tours, virtual product demonstrations, whatever it might be. But get your salespeople, I think, more engaged with what's going on with the customers. Ask for their help in how they're going to do their jobs differently going forward. But absolutely, I understand the dilemma of they've not been doing anything. They've been getting paid, but you're right. That has to end at some point for everybody. And hopefully they recognize the benefit they've had all this time and how good the company has treated them by continuing to pay them. But get them re-engaged with maybe some different activities and thinking differently, but absolutely in touch with customers. You've got to keep those customer relationships intact and growing and developing so that you don't lose those in the long term, but get them thinking about how they're going to do their jobs differently as well.
And I would add to that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead.
I would add to that, Rhonda. That's the exact type thinking. I think that they can be connecting with clients and also just plain listening to what their client situations are and struggles. So there's a lot of empathetic team building that's happening during that time. But they could also be talking to, like, what are new clients or customers that we want to position ourselves to serve on the other side? Being able to have sales and marketing folks having their own Zoom meetings to start at, giving them some curious questions to push through. What are additional clients that we could be setting up for? What are our current clients' real needs are? And then if there are new clients, then what do those services look like? What could those look like? So even if it doesn't feel like it's technical work that's getting done that they can really see, there's a lot of adaptable work that can happen.
We have some questions that we did not get to, but the very first question that was asked, Catherine asked, and we did not get to, dealt with having difficulty getting through to their bank because their bank is dealing so much with PPP that they've put on the back burner other things. Our very first webinar, we introduced the Paycheck Protection Program And a lot of folks on the webinar had not even heard of it. Now it is clearly oversubscribed. Catherine, here's what I'm going to invite you to do. I'd like to answer your question more specifically, so maybe we can handle that a little bit offline. I do want to kind of point out to you kind of what is it we're doing and why we're doing it. One thing that did not come up in great detail, but we're hearing a lot from our clients, is the legal aspects of what is it we're dealing with. And we decided to invite our friend Dan on the line. He's going to be joining us next Thursday at 10 o'clock. Dan is a lawyer who understands, and he can explain things in a way that even I can understand. He understands the legal implications of what we're dealing with. And I hate to say it, but what I'm already beginning to see are attorneys circling out there waiting to sue employers because they did not handle something quite right and it endangered their clients. Attorneys certainly to sue other businesses. And so we've invited Dan to join us next week to kind of be mindful of what are those legal considerations that we need to be mindful of as we begin this transition to reopening. It's become our practice, and we are glad that people have taken us up on it. As part of you registering for this webinar, there are some questions that you may have had that you're not comfortable putting up on the Q&A, even under the anonymous attendee category. And therefore, if you have questions and you would like to ask Rhonda or me, you'll be getting a link to that. And we'll just get on each other's calendar and we'll dedicate the time necessary to hope to get that question answered. If it's detailed and it requires up to 2 hours, we're prepared to do that very thing. We're realizing that times like this, we've got to figure out how to help each other's out. And I hope what you're finding that this webinar speaks to that need. I want to thank Sandy for you being with us this morning. Really good to see you again and learn from you. And Rhonda, as always, you contributed greatly. So for those who yet again joined us as a participant, thank you for being with us. We hope you will join us again next week. Invite your friends to do so and bring your questions with you. So on behalf of Rhonda and me and our guest, Sandy, thank you so much. I wish you all the very best. Hope to see you next week, but stay safe and stay informed. All the best, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks. You too.